Good afternoon, everybody. At the beginning of the meeting, I have to read this out, so I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being videoed. And I've only just noticed this got video as well on this, and I've been reading it the last 3 years. Members of the public are entitled to film the proceedings, providing they comply with Shropshire Council's terms and conditions, which are available today at the far end of the room. If you're filming for commercial purposes, you must first obtain permission, without which you may not proceed. Any member of the public who has any concerns should raise them now. I'm just waiting for somebody to have concerns, but never have. First items, apologies for absence. Roger Evans apologised, and we have Charles as substitute. I don't think there are any others, are there? Disclosable pecuniary interests. Okay. The minutes of the 13th of November. Would someone like to move? Seconded? Second. All in favour? Thank you. We have two public question stroke statements. The first is Mr. Malloy, if you'd like to come to the mic, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you want me to read out my question?
Well, the question has been circulated, but I thought, out of politeness, I'd ask you to come forward, because I think the way we do it is the way we do it. I think we're just going to leave it at that, to be truthful. The same thing applies. You know your subject. You know your subject better than I do in many cases. And we don't know what the supplementary question is going to be. So we could take your arguments logically and say, well, we want to answer the follow-up question, the subsidiary question, until the following cabinet, so we've had a chance to go and get information. I think sometimes people just have to accept the fact that you can put your questions, continue putting them, but and you get your follow-up question, but that is it, I'm afraid. We're not prepared to go any further than that. And that's the Constitution. So we'll leave at that point. I'm going to ask you to leave. I'm sorry, thank you. Not leave the room, just leave the table. Thank you. And the second person is you, ma'am.
I haven't quite understood what you said. So I don't read anything.
No, you can do exactly what you want. I was sorry. I was responding to Mr. Malloy's question.
Righty-ho.
Now the floor is yours.
Right. Well, leader, councillors, our elected representatives, and our public servants. You've seen my written statement, and I will read it more or less out to speak to it, because I've tried to put three major issues which I think are important for all of you if you are thinking in terms of the issue of how you're going to get money out of the museum and whether you should charge or not. And I was for 10 years a trustee of the National Museum of Scotland when we were building a new museum and had exactly the same issue. And I was for many years the chair of the Scottish Museums Council. We had 400 member museums, and I've had observations among those. So I'm not inventing this.
You have some experience, I would agree.
Well, and I'm taking it as given that the council is in financial straits, we all know, and we understand that you may be considering free entry only to the museum's ground floor, so the public can enjoy prehistory and nothing up here beyond that. Well, I've got 3 bullet points. The first one is about democracy, the idea of responding to public concerns, and the second is about public relations. And I think you must be aware there is a huge groundswell of public concern, especially for people who have worked as volunteers over many years to try and encourage the public to take an interest in the continuation of museums when they haven't been going on in the past. A lot of us have been keeping, and my colleagues here, like Mr. Waterhouse and Mrs. Baroli, to keep going the interest in museums, and feel disappointed that none of us were consulted, and that the whole thing is going to depend on the volunteers, and they feel demeaned and diminished by the way this has gone. I would like to tell you that we started our petition just a week ago, and we have roughly 600 plus signatures. 1 or 2 of them say Telford, so they'll be wiped out. But basically, we have, in a very short time, gained a lot of public voice. So that's the first point, and that's about not only democracy, but also about the public relations for the council. Secondly, the business case. And everybody knows, and I'm surprised your expert advisors didn't seem to know, that if you charge, you reduce footfall, and therefore you reduce the opportunity for income from other aspects of the museum. And it's true of all kinds and sizes of museums, and I can witness this. And somebody spoke to you about something from the University of Leicester, but Dr. Hooper Greenhill, who is the great expert, and she is constantly emphasizing that you can get new audiences. And the whole point of a new museum is you have to get new audiences. And then lastly, the question of the duty to the community. I think we're all aware that provision of museums isn't mandatory, and you've got mandatory concerns. But when they are provided, they're there for the community, for the continuing recreation and education of the public. They're particularly important for the less privileged or well-heeled. But for all, they should be objects of more than one visit. Not one visit to pay £4, but many visits to spend money in the shop and the cafe as well. So on grounds of democracy, for business reasons, and on basic principle, the flat imposition of charge is not recommended. You may wish to consult your voters on other ways of raising money. For instance, in cooperation with the Friends of the Museums that haven't been consulted at all in any stage, but charging is definitely, sir, not the answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. If someone could just switch the mic off, I'd be well. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your statement. Could I just say that we do value the volunteers and the work they do across Shropshire in museums, but in all sorts of services. And despite the fact that over the previous 4 years we've saved 87 million, we tried to protect the cultural heritage of Shropshire by not closing libraries and not closing museums. But as you correctly said at the beginning, we are in a very difficult situation at the moment, and it is only through, with the help of volunteers such as yourself and other people, that we can sustain what we've got. It's not our choice where we find ourselves.
No,
but thank you.
I think so, that's absolutely right. And I think we should recognise that the money you had for this museum came from the borough of Shrewsbury.
Well,
and I think that's very important.
I wasn't going to raise that, but since you've raised it, I will comment upon that. The scheme came to us as a unitary authority with funding, but the funding, the money, was dependent on a piece of land being sold for several £1 million, 7 I think, 6 or 7, which it didn't. The land actually sold for, the value dropped from about 6 or 7 million to about 1 or 2 million. So the scheme was substantially underfunded, and the cost of, but we could have cancelled the project, you know, but we found the money to bring it through to fruition. So let's be absolutely clear, it wasn't just funded by Shrewsbury, it was funded by Shropshire. Okay, thank you. That's dealt with public questions. Matters referred from scrutiny none. Reports of scrutiny none. Setting the council tax base for 2014-15, Mike.
Thank you, Leader. The paper before Cabinet is provided on an annual basis, identifying the Brand D equivalent tax base for all town and parish administrative areas across Shropshire. It is necessary to identify the tax base at this time to enable town and parish councils to meet their precepts for the 2014-15 financial year. The localisation of council tax support from the 1st of April of this year resulted in a loss of funding of over 10%, costing Shropshire Council over 2 million. Proposals approved by Cabinet last year have been implemented and are reaffirmed here, and further revisions to the policy set out in recommendations 2.6 to 2.10 of the report. Appendix A provides details of the reduced tax base figure for each town and parish council, and we will work with our colleagues in these organisations to manage the implication of these changes. And so, Leader, I move the recommendations which are contained in 2.1 to 2.11 inclusive.
Okay, thank you very much. All agreed? Oh, so you didn't get it.
Sorry.
Go on, go for it.
It was just a quick one really, about the council tax support. I was just wondering, it says that there'll be no changes to the scheme, which is great, but I was just wondering how much was used in the first year of the council tax support grant, and I presume you won't be able to answer this question off the cuff, but I was wondering what the level of acceptance was for those who applied, and has the time to process the applications of people asking for the help reduced? Because I remember when it was first implemented, there was quite a severe backlog.
Do you want to bash that?
I think it's probably...
You see why it's helpful to have questions in advance.
I think it's probably best if we get a full response back to you, because there's quite a few elements of that which have varied over the year, and it probably take quite a lot of time to go through them now. But if we can just put a response back to you, if that's okay.
Thank you. Okay, we all happy with that?
Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. Income, review of fees and charges. Councillor Andrew Bannerman wants to speak. But do you want to go first, Michael, or would you prefer to? You'll go first. Do you want to come and join us, Andrew? I'll let Mike speak first, then we'll let you. Okay. And then, but you may as well come and sit up.
This report provides Cabinet with a comprehensive breakdown of all income earning opportunities across the council. A thorough review has been undertaken, taking into account the market forces, competition, and the customer reaction to fees and charges which have been levelled by the council. It is important to remember that if we are to protect frontline services, we need to maximise the impact of any income generating opportunities that we have. Therefore, we have to take a balanced view of all of our finances and consider where increases in fees and charges are appropriate and where they are not. The principles we have adopted are included in section 7 of the report. Managers across the council have looked carefully at their fees and charges to ensure that we meet this balanced view. Areas where increases are proposed are set out clearly in paragraph 9.2 of the report, and in closing, Leader, details of all our areas of discretionary income generation is included in Appendix 1, and a complete schedule of all fees and charges, including all proposed charges, are set out in Appendix 3. I move the recommendations contained in this report, 2.1 to 2.6 inclusive.
Thank you very much. Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. I've really only got 3 separate points to make. The first is a question which probably can be easily answered. I note that the charges for the Acton Scott Museum are proposed to be reduced in the following financial year, and I just wondered if that was to do with falling attendance or what the reason was for that. The second part I wish to just mention is the theatre. I know, because of my connections with theatre, drama companies and so on, that amateur companies are now having to charge in the region of something like up to £16 a ticket in order to cover the charges that have risen 5% a year, which is, if you think about it, cumulatively over 3 or 4 years or more, that is a substantial rise in the costs to a company wishing to perform at Theatre 7. And I just wondered why that 5% rise was instituted on an annual basis. The other aspect that companies find very difficult to deal with is that credit cards, there is a commission on people buying a ticket, which is a standard practice, I'm sure, charged by the theatre to the individual who buys the ticket. That's understandable. But there's another charge also levied by the theatre on the company, which is a percentage of the tickets sold, and that is another charge that companies are finding really difficult to handle without putting their prices up so high that they either lose customers or are unable to put the show on. And now can I come briefly to the museum? I think you've heard from Professor Lalajiban what the feeling is in the town and among those who have worked hard to make this terrific project, and I do commend all the people who have been concerned with it, to make this a real success. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to be doing in these times of great financial difficulties, that we are actually opening a new facility. The restoration project has been a huge success, and I know that Mike Owen was much involved in that at the start, and I commend him particularly, and all the others who have been working so hard on this project. However, there's a danger that we undercut this success, because there's a very strong feeling that the county museum, and this is what it is the county museum, should be free of charge, because it is in effect a showcase for what we have to offer. It is really an illustration for the Visitor Information Centre. It's like the Visitor Information Centre with pictures, if you like. It's a way of saying, this is what our county has to offer, and it should point us out to the town and the county. A few details. Children surely should be free on principle, and also because if you think about it, if you charge for children, even at the rate of £2, you're rapidly going to get to £10 or £12 for a family to go and visit the museum. And in terms of the consultations, I just wonder why the local people and local institutions weren't consulted, apart from this professional consultancy who were brought in. I'm sure, for instance, that the Abbey would be able to tell you that they gather a large amount of money from their donations box. And I would have thought it might be worth trying, just say for the first year, put it on a temporary basis, that we actually don't charge for the museum, but we put a prominent donations box, well signed and well argued as to what you should put in it and why instead. And I think that would gather a huge amount of support in the town. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan.
Just to confirm the wide level of concern about this, I actually chaired the Shrewsbury Wide LJC some weeks ago when it was first quietly announced that there would be charges, and then there was some discussion about the £4 and £2, and then the issue of charging was put to the vote, and about 80 people there, and it was unanimously opposed by all concerned. And I am also concerned about the level of consultation that there's been prior to the announcement of charges with the friends who clearly do a great deal of work behind the scenes, and who the council, whether it's charges or not, will depend on for a supply of volunteers and a supply of ongoing academic and other interests. It seems to me that the proposals that are presented, if there are to be some charges, which of course is debatable, and I understand what the previous speakers are saying and applaud that, are quite high, £4 and £2. The cost of taking a family is very significant, and of course what these high charges mean is that if a family is going out for the day on a budget, then if they are having to pay that amount of money to get in the place, they're not spending money in the place or spending as much money in town. So it's a double whammy in that respect. I think there need to be plans and packages for fees that don't seem to be incorporated in these particular proposal. And I also think that we have to accept that these are very difficult times for people to afford to do these sort of things. And I fear for those who may be in dire straits financially, or even those who are not at the higher levels of income. And these fees will clearly deter their participation in this wonderful heritage scheme for Shrewsbury, and will obviously inhibit their attendance. I'm also surprised that at least in the interim period there isn't some very significant concession for people who are resident in Shrewsbury and Shropshire. It is their museum. They ought to be very much encouraged to come along and see what is on offer, and the facility for that is something that's much needed when this opens.
Thank you, Charlotte.
I think I would echo most of Alan's comments that he's already made. I actually had it written on my notes that I thought that maybe we could propose free admission for the first 12 months, just to see whether people do make their donations or not, or get a rough idea of how much people are donating, to see what would be suitable charges as well. And I think it is a really important way of promoting people coming to Shropshire, having the opportunity to be able to do something. If they can do something like that for free, they're not going to just go straight home and not spend any money. They're going to stay within the town and spend money in different ways. And I thought that that's what we were trying to do as a council, was making sure that the pound kept on getting spent and re-spent in Shropshire. And so, as I say, I would support what Alan and Andrew has already suggested, and I echo their comments.
Yeah, just a general comment. One of the problems that we have, and you raised it in your points at the beginning, was there must be other things we can make savings on or cut or stop doing. But the problem is when you go out and ask people, as Radio Shropshire did, quite wonderfully a couple of months or so back, not one single person came up with one single idea on where we could save money, but almost every person they asked came up with an idea on where we could spend money. And we are in such a difficult financial situation with having to find another 80 million and 40 million in the coming 12 months. It's a really hard situation. The fact that we found the money to finish and complete the project is something we should be proud of. Now, and how we go forward is still open for debate. Lee.
Thank you, Leader. I wanted to ask. I certainly had a very helpful and constructive letter from Richard Hayes, who wrote to me in relation to the fees and charges, particularly at the museum. I thought that amongst his suggestions and comments, he made reference to an annual season pass, and I wondered whether perhaps you could tell us whether that's going to be available to visitors of the museum.
Yeah, thank you. I received Richard's email cover letter, and it was a very positive, constructive dialogue, and I thought it was nice to get that. And that was one of the points he made, which I thought was very valid. Steve, do you want to tackle some of these?
Yeah, by all means, Leader. Yeah, I mean, I have Richard's letter as well, very eloquent, very well put together. And of course, Richard has been a great benefactor of the Shropshire and Shrewsbury museums previously, especially with the quarterly collection. And I do hope that will continue. Season ticket ID, yes, it's incorporated into the plan already. I think for the price of 10 visits, I think it's £40 for a season ticket. Go as many times as you want. That's just a range of packages into the pricing structure which we brought in. Volunteers have been mentioned. Volunteers can visit as many times as they want, as long as they're actively volunteering, and that's something that we would encourage. We'll also be encouraging the schools to get involved, so at a young age you have that continuity of volunteers coming through. We've also got the Passport to Culture, so Acton Scott, Shrewsbury Castle and obviously the music hall, all packaged together, so you can visit 2, visit 3, pay for 2 sort of offer. So there are all those sort of ranges of things, plus concessions, plus there will be special offers of I've agreed with the officers to give dispensation in consultation with myself to run special offers throughout the year to react to the market conditions and the demand that there is there. And the concept of charging for attractions across Shropshire and wider is already established. I've just got a couple here. Blitz Hill over in Ironbridge, it's almost £16 for a day visit there. We're talking £4. The Tar Tunnel is £3. Roxton Roman City, that's £5.20. We're not talking huge money here. Obviously, it does impact on the less well off, but I think it is a sustainable approach. Even a day at Buckingham Park is going to cost you almost a tenner. If you talk about a family, this is small beer in comparison. We've had to draw a business case up for the museum going forward. We have to make it sustainable for future generations. It's a huge investment that's been made. We want to make sure that it's preserved for the future. Everybody says, but museums should be free. In reality, no museum is free because it has running costs, it has heating costs, it has insurance and everything else built on. I don't want to be in a situation where we look back in a few years' time, the museum has a huge subsidy which is unsustainable. By putting in a pricing structure, I hope that we can bring this in and keep it on a stable base and make it a museum that Shrewsbury and Shropshire will be proud of. And I hope that the friends of the museum will come on board as well and continue the magnificent support which they've shown in the past.
Good.
Thank you, Lee. Before I go on to talk about the theatre, I'd like to echo my support for Councillor Charney and what he said. And I think very often, although I do understand the empathy of all the conversations we're having, unless you put value on something, it doesn't be seen as value. I echo what we provide for the youth service. If you provide something for nothing for the youth, they don't turn up because they don't think it's any worth anything. And sometimes you need to actually, how are we going to attract, the big exhibitions? How are we going to afford to attract the big exhibitions if we've got no funding? How are we going to get the quality in here, which again will bring the tourism? That's the comment I'd like to make on that. Moving forward with the theatre, thank you, Andrew, for the comments you've made. Hopefully I can reassure you, we have actually had funding from the Arts Council to undertake a consultation process through Black Radley, of which we're waiting for the response both on the museums and the theatre. I've actually got a date in the diary of the 8th of January to meet with Sue Campion and some of the other, Jonathan I think it is, at the Coffee House in relation particularly to local dramatic groups and amateur dramatics and making more use of the smaller theatre. And I'm, as with everywhere else in the council, I think it's very much a case now that we need to sweat the assets. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done around the theatre for other agendas within this council. And there could be a lot of opportunities. But we are awaiting the outcome of that consultant's document that's come out. Again, I repeat, at no cost to ourselves. In relation to the booking process, and I understand that booking fee which is charged back as part to the production companies, unfortunately the system that is in place now is very rigid and they can't change the software on the booking process. However, the lease is up and it will be replaced in the spring. So that gives us opportunities for different productions to have different costing levels. But it is normal practice that when you go to the theatre, we all go to Ticketmaster or wherever, you pay your credit card fee and then you get charged £1.50 or £2.50 on top, which doesn't go to the company. But I can assure you that that fee that Theatre 7 takes goes directly to the theatre. It doesn't come into our coffers. So it is part of helping them. But be quite happy to have you come on board with any of those working groups, Andrew. Okay, thank you very much.
Alan. I can't let William's comment about things only having value where there's a monetary sum attached to them. That is absolute nonsense. And in terms of saying that because £4 isn't of much impact on my personal finances, then it's got less value than for somebody who's at a different personal circumstance. It has to hurt before it's valued. So I'm saying, some people will not be able to attend the museum, not because they don't value it, not because they don't want to be there, but because they cannot afford to get in. I incidentally ran a youth service last night at Linked to the Friends at Flaxivity. 45 kids were there having a good night for 2 hours. They weren't there because it was free. It wasn't that they didn't value it, and if there was a charge on it, they wouldn't have been able to attend there because their parents would not have the money to give them to go. So please, let's get away from this idea that things are only valuable insofar as there's a fee attached, and some people who can afford it are able to pay that fee.
Okay. Well, I think we've taken that as far as we can go. The theatre, it's another interesting one. You know, I value the theatre. I think it's fantastic. We've got a fairly new theatre in Shrewsbury. But if you read the press, we annually get slated because of the subsidy that goes into the theatre, Andrew. You know, not everybody values culture in the same way. And the museum, if the charge for the museum aren't coming to our office to help us with the financial situation we find ourselves in, it's to help make the theatre, the museum a sustainable thing going forward and in the future. Because museums, as we all know, always cost money, don't they? Anyway, we're all happy to move on?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Did you want to
say something?
Please, yeah, sorry, I missed you, Michael.
The recommendation to charge has therefore not been totally taken lightly. I can assure you of that. And it has not been taken without options considered and without external national experts verifying our approach. So we have consulted. Equally, Professor Liage-Brown made comment with regards to Leicester University and the doctor. But Leicester Museum has a study department, which is where she works. She quotes that people who are accustomed to visiting a museum are not inclined to change this behavior when their income decreases or administration fees increase. On the other hand, people who are not accustomed to visiting a museum are insensitive to the incentive fee or reduced administration ought to give to visiting. She quotes that, which you didn't mention.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We'll have to move on. Thank you very much. Item 9, Q2 performance report. Tim, in your new role.
Thank you, Keith. You've got before you Q2's performance report, which is written around the Council's 4 priorities listed in the paper in paragraph 1.3, which, just for completeness for those in the audience who may not have seen them, would be keeping children safe, high quality education, looking after vulnerable people and economic growth. It's worth noting that the Council progresses with the delivery of the business plan and the changes required. And as that business plan is implemented, the way in which we measure performance will have to change. And I, at the moment, I'm working with officers and others on producing some simple performance measures which will measure change and also help change to happen. If you look at the organisational health scorecard, we continue to show improvement on the same period 12 months ago, with more than half the measures achieving performance at or above the planned level, reflecting the continued efforts and hard work in these increasingly challenged times of our staff and those who provide service for the people of this county. They deserve our thanks and support, because life has not been easy for members of staff over the last year, but they continue to produce exceptionally good results. Due to the economic environment we are operating in, pressures will begin to show on our services. We've always said that, and there's a couple of areas in particular which leap out at you and which are covered in the report. Demand on children's social care and safeguarding teams is increasing, with the number of looked after children moving to be broadly in line with the same levels as other similar councils. and more children are becoming to a child protection plan. This, I know, is a subject of concern for the director and portfolio holder, and continued effort will be looked at this, and we wait to see what the Q3 performance is before we take any more drastic action. Keeping the focus on children and young people, it's pleasing to see a significantly greater proportion of the primary schools in the county are judged as good and outstanding compared to a year ago, and more Shropshire pupils attending these high-performing schools as a result. Since that reporting period, there's been a further increase on both counts. So overall, a positive report on our performance that provides us with the reminder that we are at challenging times and we must be aware of the changing demand for our services. So, Keith, I do welcome any observations. I think it's important that members generally are encouraged to read these reports and to use them for what they are there for. I went to a seminar on Friday and was slightly disappointed at the level of understanding by some of our members of what is being reported here, because this is a key measure of performance, particularly the dashboards. So with that, I move the recommendations in paragraph 2.
Okay, thank you. All happy?
Yeah.
Declare the meeting closed at 13:06.